The alarm tore through our home before I had even opened my eyes. Not the soft chime we used for weather warnings or supply deliveries, but a deep, pulsing sound that made the walls themselves seem to shake. I sat up fast, my heart pounding, and found the other side of the bed empty. The sheets were still warm. I found Ethan in the kitchen, already dressed, already calm in a way that felt wrong. He was pouring coffee like it was any other morning, except his hands were steady in a way they never were before sunrise, and his eyes kept flicking toward the window, toward the sky, toward something I could not see yet. "Leora," he said, without turning around, "I need you to listen carefully, and I need you to trust me." I had heard that tone from him only once before, on the day we signed our marriage contract, when he had looked at my family and promised them he would protect me with everything he had. I had thought it was just a phrase humans used, a pretty sentence for a pretty moment. I did not know, that morning in the kitchen, that he had meant it as a fact. Outside, the sky over our city had turned a strange, burnt orange. Ships were moving across it in formations that were too fast, too sharp, too deliberate to be anything but a threat. The Threll fleet had crossed the border during the night, and no one, not even our own defense council, had seen it coming. Ethan set the coffee down without drinking it. He walked to a section of the wall I had never paid attention to before, pressed his palm against a panel that lit up gold, and a compartment slid open. Inside was a case I did not recognize, sleek and dark, with his name etched into the side in letters I could not read. "You're a diplomat," I said, my voice shaking. "You negotiate trade routes. You settle border disputes. You are not a soldier." He looked at me then, and for the first time in 11 years of marriage, I did not recognize the man standing in front of me. His face was the same. His eyes were the same warm brown I had fallen in love with. But something underneath had shifted, like a door opening onto a room I never knew existed in our own house. "I need you to go to the lower shelters," he said. "Take Priya with you. Don't wait for me. Don't look for me on the news feeds. Just go." Priya was our neighbor, an elderly woman who lived 2 floors below us and always brought us fruit from her garden. I loved her like family. But in that moment, all I could think about was the man in front of me, the one I thought I knew completely, walking toward a door with a weapon case in his hand like it belonged there. "Ethan," I said, grabbing his arm, "talk to me, please." He paused. For just a second, the calm cracked, and I saw fear in his eyes, not for himself, but for me. "There are things about my work I was never allowed to tell you," he said quietly, "not because I didn't trust you, because telling you would have put you in danger. I am so sorry, Leora. I will explain everything. I promise. But right now, every second we spend talking is a second the shields over this city stay down." Then he kissed my forehead, said my name one more time, like it was something precious he was trying to memorize, and walked out into a sky that was falling apart. I did not go to the shelter right away. I stood at the window and watched him cross the courtyard below, moving with a kind of purpose I had never seen in him. He met 3 other people near the transport pad, all of them carrying the same kind of case he did. One of them, a tall woman with short silver hair, said something to him, and he laughed, actually laughed, in the middle of a sky full of enemy ships. I realized then that whatever this was, he had done it before. Many times. And every time he came home to me afterward with stories about trade meetings and border talks, he had been lying, gently, carefully, to keep me safe. The transport lifted off, and I finally understood that my husband, the man who cried during old films about dogs, who could not kill us insect without apologizing to it first, who spent our anniversary each year writing me a new poem instead of buying a gift, was about to disappear into a war I did not know he was trained for. I took Priya to the shelter, but I could not stay there. The lower levels were packed with frightened families, children crying, elders praying in 6 different languages at once. I kept thinking about Ethan's face when he said he was sorry. Not sorry for leaving, sorry for the years of careful, loving lies. 3 days passed with no word from him. The city above us had gone dark except for the flashes of distant engagements, streaks of light too far away to hear, but close enough to see through the shelter's narrow windows. I spent those days asking questions of anyone who would answer them. A young officer named Callum, barely out of his training, finally told me the truth, though he looked nervous the entire time he spoke. The humans who came with the first trade envoys, he said, keeping his voice low so the others in the shelter would not hear. They were never just diplomats. Your government knew. Mine too, probably, somewhere at the top. They send people who look soft, people who smile easily and make you feel safe. But underneath that softness is decades of preparation. It's called the legacy program. Children raised from birth to build peace first, and only ever fight when peace has completely failed. Why would they hide something like that? I asked. Callum shrugged, tired, his eyes red from lack of sleep. Would you have trusted them if you knew from the start what they were capable of? Would any of us have opened our borders to them? I did not have an answer for him. I still don't. Not fully. But I understood, in that moment, that Ethan had not been hiding a lie from me. He had been protecting something bigger than our marriage, something that had been built long before I ever met him, across 100 worlds that needed to believe humanity was gentle before they could learn that humanity was also strong. On the fourth day, the shelter's speakers crackled to life with an announcement that made the whole room go silent. The Threll advance fleet had been pushed back from the outer shoals. Not destroyed completely, but broken, scattered, retreating faster than anyone expected. The voice on the speaker did not explain how. It only said that a small group of human vessels had turned the tide during the night, using tactics that the Threll command had clearly never encountered before. I did not celebrate with the others. I sat in the corner of that crowded shelter with my knees pulled to my chest, praying to whatever was listening that the man who wrote me poems on our anniversary was still alive somewhere above that burning sky. He came back on the 7th day. I did not recognize him at first. He walked into the shelter's medical bay with a support brace around his ribs, and a cut across his cheek that had already been sealed, but not fully healed, and for a moment, I thought I was looking at a stranger wearing my husband's face. Then he saw me, and his whole body seemed to soften, the tension draining out of his shoulders the way it always did when he came home from a long day at what I had thought was an ordinary desk job. "Leora," he said, and his voice cracked on my name. I crossed the room faster than I had ever moved in my life, and wrapped my arms around him, careful of the brace, careful of everything, and he held me so tightly I could feel his heartbeat against my cheek, fast and alive. "You lied to me," I whispered into his shoulder, "for 11 years. "I did," he said, "and I will spend the rest of my life making it right, if you'll let me." I pulled back to look at him, the cut on his cheek, the exhaustion carved into every line of his face, the way his eyes still carried that fear I had seen the morning he left. Fear not of the war, but of losing me, because of what the war had revealed about him. "Tell me everything," I said. "No more careful lies, no more protecting me from the truth." He nodded slowly, and that night, once the medics had cleared him, and we were finally alone in a small room they had given us in the shelter, he told me. He told me about a program that began generations ago on Earth, after humanity had fought its way through wars so terrible that the survivors swore they would never let their children grow into people who reached for weapons first. They built something new instead. Children trained from a young age to negotiate, to listen, to build trust across cultures that had never spoken to each other before. But they also trained a smaller number of those same children in something else, something kept quiet, even within their own governments. Strategy, tactics. The discipline to fight only when every other option had already failed, and to do it quickly, precisely, without cruelty, so that peace could be rebuilt as soon as possible afterward. They chose people who loved deeply first, Ethan said, his hand wrapped around mine. Because a person who has already learned how to love a whole planet of strangers is less likely to become someone who enjoys what comes after love fails. That was the whole idea. Send the gentlest people first. Keep the strength hidden until it's truly needed. And even then, use it only enough to protect, never to conquer. "And you were chosen for this when you were a child?" I asked. "My grandfather was one of the first," he said. "My father after him. I grew up believing it was simply what our family did. Learn languages, learn cultures, learn to care about people who looked nothing like us. And somewhere in the middle of all that, learn the other part too, the part we hoped we would never have to use." I thought about our wedding day, about the way he had promised my family he would protect me with everything he had. I had thought it was a beautiful sentence. I did not know it was a description of exactly what he was. Does anyone else know? I asked. Priya? Callum? Anyone in our own building? A few people. In every government, on every world we've built relationships with, he said. Enough people to trust that if something like this ever happened, we would not be facing it completely alone. Over the following weeks, as the shelter slowly emptied and the city above us began the long work of rebuilding, I watched Ethan closely. He was gentler than ever, if that was even possible, more careful with his words, more present in every quiet moment we shared. But I also caught glimpses of the other part of him now, the part I had never noticed before, because I had never known to look for it. The way he scanned every room before he sat down in it. The way he always positioned himself between me and any open door. The way his eyes tracked movement outside our window even while he laughed at something on the screen in front of us. I asked him once if he regretted it, all of it, the years of hiding, the fighting, the weight he had carried without ever putting it down in front of me. I regret that you found out this way, he said. I regret every morning you woke up next to a man who couldn't tell you the whole truth about himself. But I do not regret loving you completely, even while I was protecting a secret bigger than both of us. The war did not end all at once. There were smaller engagements over the following months, skirmishes along the outer shoals as the Threll fleet tested our defenses again and again, looking for weaknesses. Each time, Ethan and the small group of people like him were called away, sometimes for a day, sometimes for a week, and each time, I stayed behind and waited, no longer in ignorance, but in a strange kind of partnership. He told me where he could. He held me when he came home. And slowly, the fear that had lived in my chest since that first morning began to settle into something closer to trust. Priya, it turned out, had known for years. She told me one afternoon, over tea in her garden, that she had noticed things about Ethan long before I had, small details that did not fit the story of a simple diplomat. The way he moved, the way he watched crowds, the way certain officials treated him with a respect that seemed too deep for his official title. I never said anything, she told me, because it was not my secret to tell. But I want you to know, child, that the love in his eyes when he looks at you was never a lie. Everything else, maybe. That, never. I held on to those words during the hardest nights, when Ethan was away, and the sky over our city flickered with distant lights that might have been engagements, or might have been nothing at all. I held on to them when he came home, with new marks on his skin, that he refused to explain in detail, only telling me that he was safe, that it was over, that he was home. During one of the quieter weeks, when Ethan had been called away for only a single day, I met the silver-haired woman I had seen with him on that very first morning, the one who had made him laugh in the middle of a burning sky. Her name was Nadia, and she found me at the market near our building, buying fruit from a stall Priya had recommended. "You're Leora," she said, not really a question. "Ethan talks about you more than any of us talk about anything. It gets a little embarrassing, honestly." I laughed despite myself, surprised by how easily she smiled, how ordinary she seemed, for someone who had apparently flown into the heart of an enemy formation, without hesitation. We sat together at a small table outside the stall, and she told me stories about Ethan I had never heard, small moments from years before we met, when he was still learning what his life would ask of him. She told me about the first time he had been sent to a distant colony where two local factions were on the edge of open conflict over water rights, and how he had spent 3 weeks simply listening to both sides before he said a single word of his own. She told me how he had once given up his own place on a supply transport so an injured child from the opposing faction could be treated first, and how that single choice had done more to end the dispute than any formal treaty afterward. "That's the part people forget," Nadia said, stirring her drink slowly. "They hear about the legacy program and they think about what happened on the shoals, the ships, the tactics, all of that. But most of us go our whole careers without ever needing the other part of our training, Ethan included, until the Threll crossed the line. The gentleness isn't the disguise. It's the whole point. The rest is just what we carry in case the gentleness alone isn't enough to keep people safe." I asked her if she had ever doubted the program, if she had ever wished she had been raised differently, without the weight of carrying two entirely different versions of strength inside herself. She considered the question seriously before answering. "Sometimes," she admitted. "It's a strange thing. Growing up knowing you might have to become someone your own family wouldn't recognize. Just for a few days, just long enough to protect what matters. But then I think about people like you, people who get to fall in love with the gentle version first, without ever needing to see the other part unless everything else has already failed. I think that's worth the strangeness. I really do. I thought about her words often in the weeks that followed, turning them over the way I once turned over Ethan's poems, looking for meaning in every line. It helped me understand him a little more completely, not as a man who had deceived me, but as a man who had spent his entire life trying to make sure the people he loved would never have to see the parts of him built for war, unless the world left him no other choice. The final push against the Threll fleet came nearly a year after that first morning in our kitchen. I remember the date because it was 3 days before our anniversary, and Ethan had promised me, half joking, half serious, that he would be home in time to write my poem. He kept that promise, though he arrived exhausted, his uniform torn, a new scar tracing along his collarbone that he covered quickly with his shirt, before I could ask too many questions. The Threll ascendancy had finally withdrawn past the border entirely, their command structure broken by a combination of diplomacy and the quiet, decisive actions of people like Ethan, people the wider galaxy would never fully understand or thank. On our anniversary, he handed me a piece of paper covered in his familiar, messy handwriting. The poem was shorter than usual, and simpler, but it said more than any of the others he had written over the years. I did not marry a diplomat, it began, though that is what I told your family. I married someone who chose to be gentle every single day, in a galaxy that would have understood if he chose otherwise. I read it 3 times before I could speak. You could have told me, I said finally, setting the paper down. Not everything, but something. A hint, a warning. I know, he said, and I have spent the last year trying to figure out how to be worthy of the trust I broke by staying silent for so long. You're not broken, I told him, and I meant it. You're just more than I ever knew. That's different. We sat together in the quiet of our rebuilt home, the same kitchen where the alarm had once torn through our lives, and for the first time since that morning, I let myself believe that whatever secrets still remained between us, we would face them together, honestly, from now on. Months later, when a new envoy of young diplomats arrived from Earth to help rebuild relationships across the shoals, I watched them with different eyes than I once would have. Ordinary-looking people, soft voices, easy smiles. Somewhere among them I now understood were more people like Ethan, carrying secrets and strength in equal measure, sent ahead of the rest of their species to build trust before anyone realized exactly what that trust was protecting. I asked Ethan once, near the end of that difficult year, if he thought the program he had grown up inside of was a good thing, sending gentle people into the galaxy while hiding the steel underneath. He thought about it for a long time before he answered. I think, he said slowly, that the alternative was sending the steel first, and hoping the gentleness would follow. My grandfather believed it should always be the other way around. Love first, strength only when love has already failed, and there is nothing left to protect it with. I looked at him then, this man I had married for his laugh, for his patience, for the way he listened to every word I said, as though it mattered more than anything else in the universe. I understood, finally, completely, that none of that had ever been a performance. It had simply been the truest part of him, the part his whole life had been built to protect, even from the people who loved him most. The city around us kept rebuilding. The border along the shoals grew quiet again, watchful but calm. And in our small home, the coffee stayed just as terrible as it had always been, and Ethan still cried during old films about dogs, and every single morning, I woke up grateful that the man beside me had chosen, again and again, to let the gentleness win.